Commander Jake Morrison stared at the massive screen that covered the entire wall of the communications center, and his coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he did not care because something was very wrong in the galaxy today, and the feeling in his stomach told him that everything was about to change forever. The Deep Space Monitoring Station orbiting Kepler 442b was usually a quiet place where humans worked alongside aliens from dozens of different species, and they all monitored the peaceful communications that flowed between star systems like a gentle river of information. But today that river had become a flood of panic and fear. Lieutenant Amy Carter sat at her station with her headphones pressed tight against her ears, and her face was pale as she tried to make sense of the signals coming from the Zephyr sector, which was supposed to be one of the most peaceful regions in known space, but the messages she was receiving painted a very different picture. Commander Morrison, "Sir, you need to hear this right now," Amy said, and her voice was shaking as she looked up from her equipment with wide eyes that showed real terror. Jake walked over to her station and put on the spare headphones, and immediately he heard the voice of Ambassador Zelkov from the Valiant Confederation, and the usually calm alien diplomat sounded like he was about to break down completely. "This is Ambassador Zelkov of the Valiant Confederation broadcasting on all emergency frequencies, and we are under attack by an unknown species that calls itself the Korthic Swarm, and they are not interested in negotiation or surrender. And they are killing everything in their path, and entire star systems are going dark, and we estimate that we have perhaps days before our entire civilization is destroyed, and we are begging anyone who can help us to please respond because we do not know what else to do." The message repeated several times, and Jake could hear the fear in the ambassador's voice growing stronger with each repetition, and he knew that the Valians were not a species given to panic, because they had been peaceful for over 1,000 years and had never faced anything like this before. Dr. Ben Phillips rushed into the communications center with his tablet in his hands, and his usually neat appearance was disheveled because he had been working for 18 hours straight, trying to understand what little information they had about this new threat. "Jake, I have been analyzing the fragments of data we received from the outer systems before they went silent, and what I found is terrifying," Ben said as he showed his tablet screen to the commander. The tablet displayed a three-dimensional map of the Zephyr sector, and Jake could see that at least 12 star systems were marked in red, which meant they were no longer transmitting any signals at all, and the red zone was expanding toward the core. Valiant worlds like a disease spreading through healthy tissue. "How fast are they moving?" Jake asked, even though he was afraid to hear the answer. "At this rate, they will reach the Valiant capital world in less than 6 days, and after that they will be in position to threaten the main trade routes, and that means billions of civilians will be in danger," Ben replied, and he pulled up another screen that showed population numbers that made Jake feel sick. Amy suddenly stood up from her station, and her chair fell backward as she grabbed Jake's arm with both hands, and her eyes were wide with urgency. "Sir, I am picking up responses to the Valiant distress call, and you are not going to like what I am hearing," she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. Jake put the headphones back on and listened to the various alien governments responding to the desperate plea for help, and what he heard made his blood run cold, because species after species was offering sympathy and humanitarian aid, but no one was offering military assistance. The Centauri Council expressed their deep concern and offered to accept refugees, but they had disbanded their military forces centuries ago, when they achieved perfect peace within their borders, and they simply had no way to fight an aggressive enemy. The Andromedan Federation offered to send medical supplies and food to help with the humanitarian crisis, but their pacifist philosophy prevented them from engaging in warfare, and they hoped that diplomatic solutions could still be found. Even the mighty Arcturian Empire, with all their advanced technology, could only offer to evacuate civilian populations because their society had evolved beyond the need for violence, and they had no experience with military conflict. Jake listened to response after response, and every single one followed the same pattern of sympathy without action, and he realized that the entire galactic community had become so peaceful and civilized that they had forgotten how to fight for their survival. "This is insane," Jake said as he pulled off the headphones and began pacing around the communications center while his mind raced through the implications of What he was hearing the truth was that most species in the galaxy had classified humans as Deathworlders because Earth was such a dangerous and violent planet compared to their peaceful homeworlds, and they looked down on humans as primitive and warlike. But right now, those same qualities might be exactly what the galaxy needed. Ben was still studying his tablet when he looked up at Jake with a strange expression on his face that was part fear and part something that might have been hope. "Jake, I have been thinking about this situation, and there is something you need to understand about these Korthek creatures," Ben said as he pulled up a new display on his tablet. "What did you find?" Jake asked as he stopped pacing and focused on what the scientist was saying. "Based on the pattern of their attacks and the complete destruction they leave behind, I do not think they are interested in conquest or resources," Ben explained, and he highlighted several data points on his screen. "They are systematically destroying every form of life they encounter, and they are not taking prisoners or trying to communicate. And this is not warfare as most species understand it, because this is extermination on a galactic scale." Jake felt his stomach drop as he understood what Ben was saying, because if these creatures were truly bent on destroying all life, then the peaceful responses from the galactic community would be completely useless and billions of innocent beings would die while their governments debated diplomatic solutions. Amy had been monitoring more communications, and she suddenly turned around, with her face flushed with excitement and fear at the same time. "Commander, I am receiving fragmentary transmissions from the battle zones, and it sounds like the Korthek are using some kind of biotechnology that adapts to enemy defenses, and they are learning from each encounter and getting stronger." Jake made a decision that would change everything, and he walked over to his personal communication terminal and began composing a message that he was not authorized to send, but that he knew was necessary if there was any hope of stopping this threat. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as he typed a priority message to Earthfleet Command, and he included all the data they had gathered about the Korthek swarm and the desperate situation in the Zephyr sector, and he ended the message with a simple request for immediate military assistance. "Jake, what are you doing?" Amy asked as she saw him preparing to transmit an unauthorized message that could end his career. "I am doing what needs to be done," Jake replied as he hit the transmit button and sent the message racing toward Earth at faster than light speed. "The rest of the galaxy has forgotten how to fight, but we humans never did, and if these Korthek creatures want a war, then they are about to find out what Deathworlders can do when they are properly motivated." As the message disappeared into hyperspace, Jake looked back at the tactical display showing the expanding red zone of destruction, and he hoped that Earthfleet Command would understand the urgency of the situation and respond before it was too late for everyone. Admiral Lisa Stone was reviewing the morning intelligence reports in her office at Luna Base when the priority message from Commander Morrison arrived, and the moment she read the first paragraph, she knew that everything the human military had been preparing for during the past 50 years was about to be put to the ultimate test. The message contained detailed information about the Korthek swarm and their systematic destruction of entire star systems, and Lisa had seen enough warfare in her career to recognize a threat that could not be negotiated with or reasoned with, but only stopped through superior force and determination. She immediately activated the emergency communication system that connected her directly to every major human military installation in the solar system and beyond, and within minutes, the faces of her top commanders appeared on the holographic display in her office. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation that requires immediate action, and I am declaring a fleet mobilization under Emergency Protocol 7. Lisa announced, and she could see the surprise on the faces of her officers because Protocol 7 had never been used outside of training exercises. Captain Ryan Torres appeared on the display from his battleship UES Vengeance, which was currently docked at the Titan shipyards for routine maintenance, and his weathered face showed the kind of calm determination that had made him one of the most respected commanders in the fleet. "Admiral, what are we looking at?" Ryan asked, and his voice carried the steady tone of a man who had faced death many times and was not afraid to do so again. Lisa shared the intelligence data from the Zephyr sector and watched as her commanders studied the tactical displays showing the expanding zone of destruction and the complete lack of effective resistance from the peaceful alien civilization's Major Kate Sullivan joined the conference from the Mars training complex where she had been overseeing the final phase of marine combat exercises, and her sharp eyes immediately grasped the implications of what she was seeing. These Korthek creatures have never faced determined resistance, and they'd probably think all species in the galaxy are as peaceful as the ones they have been slaughtering. Kate observed, and there was a dangerous smile on her face that would have terrified any enemy who saw it. Chief Engineer Alex Morgan connected from the secret research facility hidden in the asteroid belt where human scientists had been developing advanced weapon systems that other species would consider barbaric and immoral, but which might be exactly what was needed to stop an extinction level threat. Admiral, I can have the new kinetic bombardment systems online within 48 hours, and the adaptive AI warfare packages are ready for immediate deployment. Alex reported, and his enthusiasm for his deadly creations was evident in his voice. Lisa stood up from her desk and walked over to the large window that showed the blue Earth hanging in space below, and she thought about all the generations of humans who had fought and died to protect their homeworld from countless threats, both natural and artificial. The other species in the galaxy have always looked down on us as primitive Deathworlders because we come from a planet that tried to kill us every single day for millions of years, Lisa said, and her voice carried a note of pride that surprised even her. They think we are violent and uncivilized because we never forgot how to fight, but today we are going to show them exactly why. Earth produced the warriors that the galaxy needs when peaceful solutions are not enough. The Admiral turned back to face her commanders, and her expression hardened into the look of a predator who had found her prey and was preparing to strike with everything she had. Ryan, I want you to take the Vengeance and lead the advance force toward the Zephyr sector, and you will be followed by Battle Group 7 under Captain Torres and the heavy assault ships from the Jupiter fleet. Lisa ordered, and she could see Ryan nodding as he accepted the mission. Kate, I want your Marines ready for boarding actions and ground assault operations, because if these Korthek creatures are using biotechnology, then we may need to get up close and personal to stop them. The Admiral continued, and Kate's smile grew even more dangerous. Alex, I want every experimental weapon system we have been developing loaded onto the fleet, because this is not the time to worry about galactic treaties or what other species think about our methods. Lisa added, and she could see the engineer's eyes light up with anticipation within. Ours, the human military machine that had been hidden from the rest of the galaxy, began to reveal its true scope and power as ships emerged from secret bases throughout the solar system and beyond, and each vessel was loaded with weapons and technology that would shock the peaceful alien civilizations. The UES Vengeance completed her repairs in record time as teams of technicians worked around the clock to install the latest weapons upgrades, and Captain Torres stood on his bridge watching the controlled chaos of preparation with the satisfaction of a professional who knew his people were the best in the galaxy. Captain, the new plasma cannon arrays are online and the kinetic missile systems are loaded and ready, his weapons officer reported, and Ryan could hear the excitement in the young man's voice. The adaptive shielding is responding perfectly to the new control algorithms, and we can adjust our defensive configuration in real time based on enemy fire patterns, his chief engineer added from her station. Ryan looked out at the fleet assembling around his ship, and he could see dozens of human warships that had been designed with one purpose in mind, which was to win battles against any enemy regardless of the cost. And each ship carried the accumulated military wisdom of a species that had never stopped preparing for war. Major Kate Sullivan was aboard the assault transport UES Warrior, reviewing her Marines and making sure they understood what they would be facing when they reached the battle zone, and she could see the determination in their eyes as they prepared their weapons and equipment. Listen up, Marines, we are going to face an enemy that has never encountered real resistance, and they think they are unstoppable because they have been killing peaceful civilians and unprepared defenders. Kate addressed her troops, and her voice carried across the hangar bay, but we are not peaceful civilians, and we are not unprepared defenders, and we come from a world that taught us how to fight for survival against impossible odds, and today we are going to teach these Korthik creatures what it means to face Deathworld Marines. The Marines responded with a roar of approval that echoed through the ship, and Kate felt the familiar surge of pride in leading warriors who would follow her into hell itself if that was what the mission required. Chief Engineer Alex Morgan was frantically coordinating the installation of experimental weapons systems across the entire fleet, and his teams were working miracles to integrate technology that had never been tested in actual combat but which represented the cutting edge of human military science. The quantum disruption torpedoes are loaded on the heavy cruisers, and the molecular disintegration beams are online for the battleships, one of his assistants reported as they worked to complete the upgrades. The psychological warfare packages are ready for deployment, and we can broadcast frequencies that will interfere with most known alien nervous systems. Another technician added as she completed the final calibrations. Admiral Stone watched the fleet preparation from her command center, and she felt a mixture of pride and sadness as she realized that humanity was about to reveal capabilities that would forever change how other species viewed them. Admiral, we are receiving reports that other human colonies are contributing ships and personnel to the relief force, and the total fleet size is now approaching 200 vessels. Her aide reported. Lisa nodded and thought about the peaceful alien governments who had offered sympathy, but no real help to the dying Valians, and she wondered how they would react when they learned that the primitive Deathworlders had mobilized the largest military force in galactic history. Send a message to all fleet commanders that we depart for the Zephyr sector in 18 hours and make it clear that this is not a rescue mission or a humanitarian operation. Lisa ordered, this is a military campaign to destroy an enemy that threatens all life in the galaxy, and we will use whatever methods are necessary to achieve victory regardless of what other species think about our tactics. As the human fleet prepared to depart for battle, the rest of the galaxy continued to debate diplomatic solutions while entire civilizations burned and died. But soon the Korthik swarm would discover that they had made a terrible mistake by awakening the Deathworld fleet. Colonel Pete Harrison stood in the briefing room aboard the UES Vengeance, studying the tactical displays that showed the route to the Zephyr sector, and he was thinking about all the battles throughout human history that had taught his species how to fight against overwhelming odds and win through determination and superior tactics. The human fleet was now traveling at maximum speed toward the crisis zone, and every ship carried weapons and technology that would horrify the peaceful alien civilizations, but which represented the natural evolution of a species that had been forged in the fires of constant warfare on a deadly planet. Dr. Carol West was conducting psychological evaluations of the crew members to make sure they were prepared for the kind of combat they would soon face, and she was amazed by the calm confidence she saw in the eyes of men and women who were heading toward almost certain death without hesitation. Colonel Harrison, the difference between humans and every other species in the galaxy is that we have never forgotten that sometimes violence is the only solution to an impossible problem. Carol observed as she reviewed her notes. The other species achieved peace by eliminating conflict from their societies. But we achieved peace by becoming so good at warfare that our enemies learned to fear us. Pete replied, and his voice carried the weight of centuries of military tradition. Lieutenant Commander Nick Adams was in the fighter bay preparing his squadron for their first encounter with the Korthik swarm, and his pilots were checking their weapons systems with the methodical precision of professionals who knew that attention to detail meant the difference between life and death. Listen up, people. We do not know exactly what we are going to face out there, but we know it will be unlike anything the galaxy has seen before. Nick addressed his pilots, and he could see the mixture of fear and excitement in their young faces. The Korthik have been destroying peaceful civilizations that never learned how to fight back, but we are not peaceful, and we know how to fight, and more importantly, we know how to win. Sergeant Maria Santos was with the Marine assault teams reviewing their equipment and tactics for boarding enemy vessels and ground combat operations, and she was thinking about the battles her grandfather had fought during the colony wars, when humans learned that survival in space required the same ruthless determination that had served them on Earth. The enemy uses biotechnology, which means their ships and weapons are alive in some sense, and that gives U.S. both advantages and disadvantages, Maria explained to her squad leaders. Living systems can heal and adapt, but they can also feel pain and fear, and we are going to use that against them in ways they will never expect. The fleet encountered its first group of refugees 3 days into the journey when they came across a convoy of valiant civilian ships fleeing. The destruction of their homeworld and the stories the survivors told painted a picture of horror that confirmed the worst fears of the human. Commander's Captain Ryan Torres ordered his ship to slow down and match course with the refugee convoy. And he personally spoke with the valiant ship commanders to gather intelligence about the enemy they would soon face. The Korthek ships are unlike anything we have ever seen before, the lead valiant captain explained through the translation system, and his voice was hollow with the trauma of what he had witnessed. They are not built but grown, and they seem to learn from every encounter, and adapt their tactics and weapons accordingly, and they show no mercy to anyone who opposes them, Dr. Carroll West interviewed several of the valiant survivors, and she was disturbed by the psychological profiles she compiled because these were beings from a peaceful civilization who had never experienced real violence, and the shock of the Korthek attacks had broken something fundamental in their minds. Colonel, these refugees are suffering from trauma beyond anything in our psychological databases, Carol reported as she shared her findings with the command staff. They described watching their families consumed by living weapons that seem to take pleasure in causing pain and suffering, and several of them have mentioned that the Korthak seem to feed on fear and terror. Pete Harrison studied the intelligence reports and compared them to historical accounts of similar enemies from human military history, and he found disturbing parallels to some of the most savage conflicts Earth had ever experienced. The Korthak sound like they combine the worst aspects of biological warfare with psychological terrorism, Pete observed as he updated the tactical assessments. They are not just trying to win battles, but to break the will of their enemies through sheer brutality. And that means we need to be prepared for a level of savagery that even we have rarely encountered. Lieutenant Commander Nick Adams had his pilots run constant combat simulations based on the new intelligence, and he was pleased to see that their training on Earth had prepared them for exactly this kind of asymmetric warfare. The enemy adapts to conventional tactics, but human military doctrine has always emphasized unpredictability and rapid tactical changes. Nick explained to his squadron leaders, "We will hit them with everything we have and then change our approach before they can adapt, and we will keep them off balance by never fighting the same way twice." The fleet received updated orders from Admiral Stone, directing them to establish contact with any surviving valiant military forces and coordinate a joint defense of the remaining inhabited systems, and Captain Torres was surprised by how quickly the peaceful aliens accepted human leadership in military matters. It seems that facing extinction has a way of changing perspectives about warfare and survival, Ryan observed as he reviewed the coordination protocols with his staff. The Valians are desperate enough to accept help from Deathworlders, and that desperation might be exactly what we need to forge an effective alliance, Sergeant. Maria Santos was conducting joint training exercises with Valiant security forces who had volunteered to fight alongside the human Marines, and she was amazed by how quickly the aliens adapted to human combat techniques when their survival was at stake. These beings have been peaceful for 1,000 years, but their ancestors were warriors, just like ours, and that fighting spirit is still buried deep inside them, waiting to be awakened. Maria reported to her commanders with proper training and leadership they could become effective soldiers in their own right. Colonel Pete Harrison was developing psychological warfare strategies based on the intelligence they had gathered about Korthek behavior, and he believed that their reliance on fear and terror could be turned against them by an enemy that refused to be intimidated. The Korthek have never faced opponents who embrace violence as a necessary tool rather than fleeing from it in horror, Pete explained to the command staff. When they encounter humans who are not afraid of their brutality, but respond with even greater determination, they may discover that their psychological advantages become weaknesses. Dr. Carol West was studying the cultural and historical backgrounds of various alien species to understand why they had become so peaceful and whether that conditioning could be overcome in the face of an existential threat. Most galactic civilizations achieved peace by suppressing their aggressive instincts and creating social structures that rewarded cooperation over competition, Carroll reported. But humans achieved peace by becoming so effective at warfare that we could afford to be peaceful, and that fundamental difference may be what determines the outcome of this conflict. As the human fleet approached the edge of the combat zone, they could see the glow of burning star systems on their long-range sensors, and every person aboard every ship understood that they were about to face the greatest test in human military history. This is not just about saving the Valians or stopping the Korthic swarm, Captain Torres announced to his crew over the ship-wide communication system. This is about proving that Deathworld warriors can protect civilization itself when peaceful solutions are not enough, and future generations will judge us by what we accomplish in the battles ahead. The fleet began final preparations for combat as they approached the first contested star system, and every human warrior prepared to show the galaxy what it truly meant to come from a world that had taught them to fight for survival against any enemy, no matter how powerful or terrifying they might be. Captain Ryan Torres stood on the bridge of the UES Vengeance watching the tactical displays as his fleet approached the outer edge of the Zephyr system, where long-range sensors had detected a massive Korthic formation moving toward the last major Valian stronghold, and he could feel the familiar calm that always came over him before a battle. The enemy force was unlike anything in human military databases because the Korthic ships appeared to be living organisms that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns and moved through space with the fluid grace of deep-sea creatures, rather than the rigid geometry of constructed vessels. Lieutenant Commander Nick Adams was in his fighter cockpit leading the advanced reconnaissance squadron toward the enemy formation, and his sensors were picking up energy signatures that defied conventional understanding of spacecraft propulsion and weapons systems. Command, this is Recon Leader, and I am getting readings that suggest the Korthic ships are not just alive, but they are communicating with each other through some kind of biological network, Nick reported over the secure channel. Their formation patterns are too coordinated to be the result of individual ship commanders making independent decisions. Commander Sam Bradley was at the tactical station aboard the flagship analyzing the enemy deployment, and he was impressed despite himself by the efficiency of their positioning because every Korthic vessel was perfectly placed to support its neighbors while maintaining clear firing lanes. Captain, the enemy has arranged themselves in a spiral pattern that maximizes their firepower coverage while minimizing our ability to concentrate our attack on any single target, Sam reported to Torres. They are either very experienced tacticians or their biological coordination gives them advantages we have never encountered before. Chief Petty Officer Dana Lee was coordinating damage control preparations throughout the fleet, and she was making sure that every ship had backup systems ready to compensate for the inevitable casualties they would suffer in the coming battle. All ships report ready for combat operations, and the new adaptive armor systems are online, Dana announced over the fleet communication network. Medical teams are standing by, and emergency evacuation procedures have been reviewed with all personnel. The Korthic fleet began moving toward the human formation with a synchronized precision that was both beautiful and terrifying to watch, and Captain Torres realized that his enemy possessed capabilities that would require him to abandon conventional military thinking. All ships, this is Torres, and we are about to engage an enemy unlike anything humanity has ever faced, the captain announced over the fleet-wide channel. Remember your training and trust your instincts, and do not hesitate to use every weapon at your disposal because these creatures have shown no mercy to anyone who opposed them. The first exchange of fire came when the leading Korthic vessels launched what appeared to be living projectiles that moved through space like schools of fish, seeking their targets, and the human point defense systems had difficulty tracking weapons that seemed to think for themselves. Lieutenant Commander Nick Adams led his fighter squadron in a high-speed attack run against the nearest Korthic ship, and he was amazed when his missiles struck what appeared to be solid hull plating, only to watch the damaged sections begin healing themselves within seconds. Command, the enemy ships have regenerative capabilities and conventional weapons may not be sufficient to achieve permanent damage. Nick reported as he pulled his fighter into a tight turn to avoid the counterattack. We need to hit them harder and faster than they can repair themselves. Captain Torres ordered his weapons officer to target the largest Korthek vessel with a full spread of the new quantum disruption. Torpedoes and the crew watched in fascination as the experimental weapons tore through the enemy ship's living hull like acid eating through flesh. The quantum torpedoes are effective against their biological systems, the weapons officer reported. With satisfaction, the molecular disruption is preventing their regenerative processes from functioning properly. The Korthek response was immediate and devastating as dozens of their ships focused their fire on the UES Vengeance and the human flagship shook under the impact of weapons that seemed to drain energy directly from their shields and hull. Plating Commander Sam Bradley coordinated the fleet's tactical response by ordering the smaller human ships to attack in waves while the heavy cruisers provided covering fire, and he was pleased to see that human military doctrine was proving effective against the alien threat. The enemy is having trouble adapting to our rapid tactical changes, Sam reported to the captain. They seem to require time to analyze and counter our strategies, which gives us an advantage if we can maintain the initiative. Sergeant Maria Santos was leading a boarding party that had launched from one of the assault transports toward a damaged Korthek vessel, and she was curious to see what the interior of a living ship would look like, and whether human combat techniques would be effective in such an environment. Stay close and watch for biological hazards, Maria ordered her Marines as their boarding pods penetrated the enemy hull. These ships are alive, which means they might have immune systems or defensive mechanisms we have never encountered. The interior of the Korthek ship was like moving through the digestive system of some massive creature, with walls that pulsed with organic rhythms and corridors that seemed to reshape themselves to confuse the human invaders. Sergeant, the ship is trying to trap us by changing the layout of its internal structure, one of her Marines reported. As they found themselves in a dead end that had not been there moments before, the walls are closing in, and I think the ship is trying to digest us. Maria ordered her team to use their plasma cutters to burn through the living walls, and she was grimly satisfied when the ship's biological defenses proved vulnerable to sustained high-temperature damage. Keep burning through everything that gets in our way, she commanded. If this thing wants to eat us, then we will give it the worst case of indigestion it has ever experienced. Chief Petty Officer Dana Lee was coordinating emergency repairs throughout the fleet as human ships suffered damage from Korthek weapons that seemed designed to cause maximum psychological impact as well as physical destruction. The enemy weapons are not just trying to destroy our ships but to terrorize our crews, Dana reported to her superiors. They are using frequencies and energy patterns that cause fear responses in most alien nervous systems. But human crews seem to be less affected. Captain Torres realized that the battle was turning into exactly the kind of brutal, slugging match that human military doctrine was designed to win, because while the Korthek ships could regenerate damage, they could not regenerate faster than sustained human firepower could destroy them. All ships concentrate fire on individual targets, and do not let up until they are completely destroyed, Torres ordered. We will overwhelm their regenerative capabilities. Through sheer persistence and determination, the tide of battle began to shift as human tactical flexibility proved superior to Korthek. Biological coordination and the alien vessels found themselves unable to adapt quickly enough to counter the constantly changing human attack patterns. Lieutenant Commander Nick Adams coordinated his surviving fighters in a final assault on the Korthek command vessel, and he could see that the enemy formation was beginning to lose cohesion as individual ships started making independent decisions. Command, I think we are disrupting their biological communication network, Nick reported as he led his squadron through a gap in the enemy formation. The Korthek ships are no longer moving in perfect coordination, and some of them appear to be confused or disoriented. The battle reached its climax when the UES Vengeance and 3 other human battleships focused all their firepower on the largest Korthek vessel and the concentrated quantum torpedo barrage. finally overwhelmed the creature's ability to regenerate, and it began to die in space, target destroyed. The weapons officer reported with grim satisfaction. The enemy flagship is breaking apart, and the rest of their formation is beginning to retreat as the surviving Korthak ships fled toward the outer system. Captain Torres surveyed the battlefield and felt a mixture of pride and sorrow because his fleet had won its first victory against the alien threat, but the cost had been higher than he had hoped. All ships report casualties and damage status, Torres ordered, and prepare to pursue the enemy because this battle may be over, but the war is just beginning. The human fleet had proven that Deathworld warriors could stand against the Korthak swarm and win, but everyone understood that this was only the first test and much harder battles lay ahead. Admiral Lisa Stone stood in the command center at Luna Base watching the holographic display that showed the strategic situation across the entire Zephyr sector, and she felt a surge of pride as she saw that human forces had not only stopped the Korthak advance but had begun pushing the alien invaders back from several key star systems. The news of humanity's military capabilities had spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire, and species that had dismissed humans as primitive Deathworlders were now desperately requesting assistance and offering to contribute resources to the war effort. Captain Claire Fox was leading a deep strike mission behind enemy lines with her stealth cruiser UES Shadow, and her orders were to locate and destroy Korthak supply bases and communication networks to disrupt their ability to coordinate attacks across multiple star systems. Admiral, we have successfully infiltrated the Korthak rear areas, and what we found is both encouraging and terrifying, Claire reported through the encrypted communication link. The enemy supply lines are more vulnerable than we expected, but their main force is much larger than our initial estimates suggested. Major Kate Sullivan was at the Joint Operations Center on the Valiant homeworld, coordinating training programs for alien volunteers who wanted to learn human military tactics, and she was amazed by how quickly peaceful species could adapt when their survival was at stake. The Valiants have natural tactical instincts that were suppressed by centuries of peaceful conditioning, Kate reported to her superiors. With proper training, they are becoming effective soldiers, and their knowledge of local systems gives them advantages that complement our offensive capabilities. Dr. Ben Phillips was studying captured Korthak technology and biological samples in his laboratory aboard the research vessel UES Discovery, and his findings were revealing disturbing truths about the nature of the enemy they faced. The Korthak are not a natural species, but rather the result of some kind of biological engineering project that went horribly wrong. Ben explained in his latest report, they appear to have been designed as living weapons with the ability to consume and integrate other life forms into their collective structure. Admiral Stone received a priority message from the Arcturian Empire, requesting immediate military assistance after a Korthak splinter fleet had penetrated their peaceful territory and begun systematic extermination of civilian populations. It seems that the galaxy is finally beginning to understand that some problems cannot be solved through diplomacy and negotiation. Lisa observed to her staff, send Battle Group 5-2. Assist the Arcturians and make sure they understand that human commanders will have complete tactical authority. Captain Claire Fox and her crew had penetrated deep into Korthak territory and discovered a massive breeding facility where the aliens were growing new ships and warriors at an alarming rate, and she realized that conventional military victory might not be possible if the enemy could replace their losses faster than humans could inflict them. Command, we have located what appears to be the primary Korthak production facility, and it is generating new combat units every few hours, Claire transmitted from her hidden position. I am requesting immediate authorization to use the experimental antimatter charges because conventional weapons will not be sufficient to destroy this target. Major Kate Sullivan was leading a joint force of human marines and alien volunteers in an assault on a Korthak forward base, and she was pleased to see that the mixed units were fighting with the same determination and coordination as purely human formations. The enemy is retreating faster than we expected, Kate reported as her forces secured the objective. I think they are having trouble adapting to opponents who combine human tactical doctrine with alien knowledge of local conditions. Dr. Ben Phillips made a breakthrough in his research when he discovered that the Korthak hive mind structure had a critical vulnerability that could be exploited using modified human psychological warfare techniques. Admiral, I believe we can disrupt their biological communication network using specific frequency patterns that will cause confusion and disorientation throughout their entire force structure. Ben explained in his urgent report, the effect would be temporary, but it might give us the opportunity we need to strike at their command centers. The galactic situation began to change dramatically as more species abandoned their pacifist philosophies and began requesting human military advisors to help them develop effective defense forces against the Korthak threat. Commander Troy Mitchell was leading the first integrated galactic fleet composed of ships from 12 different species, all operating under human tactical command. And he was impressed by how quickly the aliens had learned to coordinate their efforts when faced with extinction. Admiral, the multi-species fleet is performing better than our most optimistic projections. Troy reported from his flagship, the combination of human strategic planning with alien technological diversity is creating capabilities that neither side could achieve. Independently, Captain Ruby Thompson was commanding a squadron of converted civilian vessels that had been armed with human weapons and crewed by volunteers from dozens of peaceful species who had never imagined they would become warriors. These civilian crews are showing remarkable courage and determination, Ruby observed as she watched her improvised fleet engage Korthak raiders. They may lack military training, but they are fighting for their homes and families, and that motivation is proving more valuable than formal combat experience. Admiral Stone authorized the deployment of humanity's most secret weapons, including the planet-killer missiles that had been developed as a last resort against extinction-level threats, and she knew that using such weapons would forever change how the galaxy viewed human military capabilities. Captain Fox, you are authorized to use whatever force is necessary to destroy the Korthak breeding facility, Lisa transmitted to the stealth cruiser. The survival of galactic civilization may depend on stopping their ability to replace their losses. The antimatter explosion that destroyed the primary Korthak production facility was visible from several star systems away, and the psychological impact on both human forces and their alien allies was immediate and profound. Command, the enemy breeding facility has been completely destroyed, Captain Fox reported with satisfaction in her voice. Early estimates suggest we have eliminated their ability to produce new combat units for at least several months. Dr. Ben Phillips deployed his psychological warfare weapon during the next major engagement, and the results exceeded his most optimistic predictions as entire Korthak formations suddenly lost coordination and began attacking each other in confused panic. The frequency disruption is working exactly as predicted, Ben reported as he monitored the battle. The enemy hive mind is fragmenting and individual ships are reverting to primitive survival instincts rather than coordinated tactical behavior. Major Kate Sullivan was promoted to general and given command of the new Galactic Defense Force that combined human military doctrine with the unique capabilities of dozens of alien species, and she felt the weight of responsibility for protecting billions of lives. The enemy is adapting to our standard tactics, but they cannot adapt fast enough to counter the combined creativity of multiple species working together, Kate explained to her diverse staff. We will defeat them by being more flexible and innovative than their biological programming can match. The war reached a turning point when the United Galactic Forces launched a coordinated offensive against 3 major Korthak strongholds simultaneously, and the enemy found themselves unable to reinforce all their positions at once. Admiral Stone watched the tactical displays showing human-led fleets achieving victory after victory across the entire theater of operations, and she realized that humanity had not only saved the galaxy but had fundamentally changed the nature of galactic civilization. The age of absolute pacifism is over, Lisa observed to her staff. The galaxy has learned that sometimes peace can only be preserved by those who are willing and able to fight for it. Captain Torres led the final assault on the last major Korthak base, and he was amazed to see ships from dozens of species fighting alongside human vessels with the same determination and courage that had always Characterize Deathworld warriors. All species advance and engage the enemy, Torres commanded today. We finish what they started when they thought the galaxy was too weak to defend itself. The Korthic command structure finally collapsed when General Sullivan's forces captured their central coordination node and severed the biological connections that had allowed them to function as a unified force. Command, we have secured the primary objective and the enemy resistance is collapsing throughout the sector, Kate reported as her mixed forces secured the alien facility the Korthic appear to be reverting to individual survival behavior, and many are attempting to flee toward unknown space as the last organized Korthic formations retreated beyond the galactic rim. The various species began to assess the cost of victory and plan for a future where peaceful coexistence would be protected by those willing to fight. When necessary, Admiral Stone addressed the assembled galactic representatives from her flagship, and she could see a new respect in their eyes as they looked at the humans who had saved their civilizations. General Frank Cooper stood on the observation deck of the massive space station that had been constructed in the Korthic home system, and he watched as the final phase of the galactic campaign unfolded with human forces leading the largest military operation in recorded history. The Korthic homeworlds were unlike anything the Allied forces had ever encountered, because the entire star system had been converted into a living organism, with planets that pulsed like giant hearts and asteroid belts that moved like circulatory systems, carrying resources between different parts of the collective entity. Commander Troy Mitchell was coordinating the assault from his flagship at the center of a fleet that included vessels from over 50 different species, all working together under human tactical command, and he felt the weight of history as he prepared to deliver the final blow against an enemy that had threatened all life in the galaxy. All fleet commanders, this is Mitchell, and we are about to begin the most important battle in galactic history, Troy announced over the combined communication network. The enemy has concentrated everything they have left in this system, and they will fight with the desperation of a cornered predator, but we have come too far to fail now. Captain Ruby Thompson was leading a squadron of the newest integrated warships that combined human weapons technology with alien defensive systems and propulsion methods, and she was amazed by how effective the hybrid designs had become. Command, the enemy is launching what appears to be their entire remaining fleet from the surface of the primary world, Ruby reported as her sensors detected thousands of Korthic vessels rising from the living planet. They are not trying to preserve anything for future operations, which suggests this is their final stand. Admiral Lisa Stone was aboard her command ship at the edge of the system, coordinating the overall strategy, and she felt a mixture of pride and sadness as she realized that this battle would mark the end of humanity's innocence in galactic affairs. The galaxy will never again view humans as primitive Deathworlders, Lisa observed to her staff. After today, we will be recognized as the species that saved civilization itself, but that recognition comes with responsibilities that will change us forever. The battle began when the Korthic home fleet engaged the Allied forces in the largest space combat operation ever recorded, and the sheer scale of the conflict was visible from neighboring star systems as millions of weapons fired simultaneously across vast distances. General Kate Sullivan was leading the ground assault forces that would attempt to capture the Korthic central control nodes on the surface of their primary world, and she was coordinating troops from dozens of species who had learned to fight using human military doctrine. All ground forces prepare for planetary assault, Kate commanded as her transports approached the living world. Remember that we are not just fighting for victory, but for the future of every peaceful species in the galaxy. The surface of the Korthic homeworld was a nightmare landscape where the ground itself was alive and hostile, and where every mountain and valley had been shaped to serve as a weapon against invading forces. Captain Torres led his battleship into the heart of the enemy formation, and his crew fought with the calm professionalism that had made human naval forces legendary throughout the galaxy. All weapons fire at will and target anything that moves, Torres ordered as his ship exchanged fire with dozens of Korthic vessels simultaneously. Show them what Deathworld warriors can accomplish when they Our properly motivated Dr. Ben Phillips was monitoring the battle from his research vessel, and he was using his understanding of Korthic biology to identify critical vulnerabilities in their command structure that could be exploited by the assault forces. General Sullivan, I am detecting a massive biological network beneath the surface of the primary continent. Ben reported to the ground forces commander. If you can sever the connections at the nodes I am transmitting to you, it should cause a cascading failure throughout their entire command system. The tide of battle turned when human psychological warfare specialists began broadcasting frequencies that disrupted the Korthak hive mind on a system-wide scale and individual enemy. Units started behaving erratically as their biological coordination broke down. Command, the enemy formation is losing cohesion, Commander Mitchell reported as he watched Korthak ships begin attacking each other in confusion. Whatever Dr. Phillips is doing, it is working better than we ever hoped. General Sullivan's ground forces fought their way through living terrain that actively tried to consume them, and they used flamethrowers and plasma weapons to burn paths through organic obstacles that regenerated faster than conventional explosives could clear them. Keep moving toward the primary node, Kate ordered her troops as they advanced across a battlefield where the ground itself was their enemy. The entire planet is trying to stop U.S., but we are going to complete this mission no matter what it takes. The breakthrough came when Captain Ruby Thompson's integrated squadron discovered that the Korthik control system had a single point of failure that could be reached by ships small enough to penetrate the planetary defenses. Command, I can reach the core control node, but my ship will not survive the mission, Ruby reported with calm acceptance. Requesting permission to proceed with a kamikaze attack on the primary target, Admiral Stone authorized the suicide mission because she understood that sometimes victory required the ultimate sacrifice, and Ruby Thompson's heroic attack destroyed the central nervous system that controlled the entire Korthik collective. Target destroyed. Came the final transmission from Ruby's ship as it disappeared in a massive explosion. The enemy command network is going offline throughout the system. With their hive mind severed, the remaining Korthik forces reverted to primitive individual behavior, and many simply stopped fighting as their biological programming collapsed without central coordination. General Sullivan's ground forces secured the primary control nodes and confirmed that the Korthik threat had been permanently eliminated. But the cost of victory had been higher than anyone wanted to calculate. Command, all major objectives have been secured, Kate reported from the surface of the dying world. The enemy collective has been destroyed, and the surviving individual units pose no significant threat to galactic security. The aftermath of the final battle saw the establishment of the Galactic Defense Initiative, with humanity serving as the military advisors and training cadre for a new generation of defenders who would ensure that peaceful civilizations would never again be helpless against existential threats. Admiral Stone addressed the representatives of all the allied species from the bridge of her flagship, and she could see that the galaxy had been forever changed by the conflict. The age of absolute pacifism is over, but the age of protected peace is just beginning. Lisa announced to the assembled delegates, humanity stands ready to share our military knowledge with any species willing to learn how to defend themselves and their neighbors. Commander Troy Mitchell was promoted to admiral and given command of the new multi-species fleet that would patrol the galactic rim, watching for threats that might emerge from unknown space. The Korthik were not the first predator species the galaxy has faced, and they will not be the last, Troy observed in his final report. But now we are prepared for whatever may come, because we have learned that sometimes the only way to preserve peace is to be better at war than those who would destroy it. Years later, historians would mark the Korthik War as the moment when the galaxy grew up and learned that survival required more than good intentions and diplomatic solutions, and they would remember that when the SOS came that no one anticipated, it was the Deathworlder fleet that answered the call and saved civilization itself, through courage, sacrifice, and an unbreakable determination to protect the innocent from those who would consume them. The human warriors had earned their place as the guardians of galactic peace, but more importantly, they had taught other species that true strength came not from avoiding conflict, but from being willing and able to fight for what mattered most when peaceful solutions were not enough.